All right, I'm recording.
Okay. Let me see if I can just move it. Okay. So I decided to do the Maiden of Ludmir. Her name was Chan Rachel Verbmacher. Apologies if I have the pronunciation is wrong. Okay. So she came from the shtetl of Ludmir, which is modern day Ukraine in 1800s. She was born to her parents, Munish Webermacher, and his wife. I never found the name of his wife, but they were both followers of Hasidus, specifically of the Rebbe from Chernobyl, the Maggid of Chernobyl. And it's important to note that she was not initially from like a great lineage of like Hasidic dynasty. She didn't come from great rabbis or anything. Like her father was a wealthy businessman. And so her parents were childless for 10 years, and so they decided to go to the Rebbe for a bracha. And the Rebbe gave them a bracha that there were different sources of which Rebbes, so I'm not going to say which Rebbe it was the exact one to give the bracha, that they should have a child. So when they had Chana growing up, she wasn't like most children. She didn't like playing. She always just wanted to learn. And she'd beg her father to let her learn. So he brought her to private tutors. And the one thing that he was trying to prevent her from learning was Gemara specifically. And she kept begging and begging to just learn more and more. Yeah, and she just excelled in all of her studies, and she ended up being known around her as a Talmud Chacham, which is normally, a male scholar, just because of how dedicated she was to learning and how much she was able to internalize all the information. She was even committed to davening 3 times a day, which was very unusual, especially during those times, the Hasidic circle specifically. And I'm sure all circles, but yeah, she even put on tefillin, which is usually something for the men to do. And so her father was getting a little nervous about this, so he took her to the Maggid of Chernobyl and like told him, like, maybe you can help me out. She's doing all these men's things. She's so learned. She's just a child. And this was when she was about 12 years old that she started putting on both sets of tefillin. And so the Maggid of Chernobyl was saying, no, this is amazing. She should continue. She's doing such a great job. She would quote great figures to her father and to the Maggid of Chernobyl, such as Beria, who was an amazing figure in her own right. In like the Talmudic times, she was known to be very well versed in halacha and Torah. And Michal, which was Shaul's daughter, she also was known for putting on tefillin. So the Maggid of Chernobyl said, this is fine as long as you commit to getting married. Like keep that as your womanly role. And so eventually she did find someone she was interested in. There were different stories of how she met her chatan. Some people say that it was he was hiding from the Russians because he was conscripted into the Russian army. Some people say that it was from he was a guy in yeshiva who was like going from house to house. Sometimes people would host yeshiva bachrim for meals. So the stories don't all match up. So the Hasidic custom is that once the couple is engaged, you don't see each other until marriage. So that's what they did. And shortly after the engagement, her mother actually passed away. And so there was a whole incident where she was going to the cemetery crying over her mother's grave, and she was getting up to leave. She tripped on a stone and she fell, and she was in a coma for a few days. And after she woke up, she had like this new, um, she was just even more unusual. She was able to like recite Torah that she had never learned before, and yeah, it was like all very much more extreme. So she ended up breaking off her engagement and just dedicating her life to Torah, dedicating her life to Hashem. She did, and later on, her father ended up passing away. It said that he was just completely heartbroken because he never got to see his daughter to the chuppah or anything like that. Okay. And so after some time, she ended up being known for her Ruach HaKodesh. And people would seek advice from her. It started off being just the poor people, the people who couldn't afford to give great rebbes any money for giving them a bracha or anything like that. And the elderly who couldn't travel very far. So she ended up growing a base of supporters, and then it continued to grow. She was giving Divrei Torah to a group of her followers every Sudat Shlishi on Shabbat, like a drush, and she was even she like kept it mute, like she never actually spoke to the crowd. If there were men like in front of their faces, it would always be like behind a door or behind a curtain or whatever. And so the Maggid of Chernobyl ended up coming to visit her again. Obviously he had heard about what kind of support had been growing, and he just reminded her to marry again. So she did, and she divorced fairly shortly after. I've seen some sources say like after 3 days. Some people say that there had whatever I had seen that some people said like the Hasidic custom is to shave your head for a woman after you get married. And she felt like she lost some Ruach HaKodesh once that happened. So, some people say like that was the reason for the divorce, not 100%, but yeah, it was very interesting. I did see she ended up having a child. I'm not sure like which marriage it was from because I saw that she might have been married a couple of times. But apparently her child became sick, and she made a promise to Hashem and to herself that if her child was healed, she would move to Israel. So she did that, and yeah, there were reports saying, we could see her carrying her towels and tefillin, going to the kotel, and yeah, she just stuck with it. So pretty much she became a rabbi in her own right. She was giving advice, she was giving brachot, she had Ruach HaKodesh from the sounds of it. And oops, sorry, I think this is, and yeah, so that's a little bit about Chana Rachel, the Maiden of Ludmir. That's it.
All right, thank you. That was so fascinating.
Yeah.
I'd heard about her before. Actually, I know I've read some of the book about her, but I didn't know all of the things that you just taught us. That's amazing. A little scary, actually. But some holy people are kind of in a different world, and one of those "don't try this at home" kind of situations. By the way, behind Zavie, you see the sun rising in Israel. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Daylight.
Thank you very much. That's a real Mesirat Nefesh. You sacrificed quite a bit to be here today, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Zavie.
Thank you.
Was she like was she kind of like those women of the Western Wall type people, like with the tallest and tefillin, like we like kind of
There was like actual sources though that she was doing. She actually knew what she was doing.
Amen.
Well put. Okay. All right. With so our next speaker today is right here, Lauren. Let's pin you here. Hello. You're still muted though.
Oh, hi.
And you'll be speaking about Rebbetzin Chaya Ausband. Very
Yes.
exciting. Thank
Okay.
you.
I was hoping to go first because I don't have a fancy PowerPoint, but so I'm just gonna pull up my notes. Okay, so I'm talking about Rebbetzin Chaya Ausband. So she was born Chaya block in Telts, Lithuania in 1923. She was the daughter of Rabbi Abraham Yitzhak Block, who is the head of the Telts Yeshiva. And she came from a long lineage of Torah aristocracy. So everything, like her life was I guess normal those times until the war in 1941. The Nazis entered Telts and they took over the city and they had murdered all the Jewish men in the city, including her father. And they took the women and they separated the women, the older and the younger, and they put them into a ghetto. And the Rebbetzin ended up there with her cousin Naomi, who was more frail than she was, and she accredits her survival through that time by having to take care of her cousin. And they were eventually transferred to a labor camp, but survived. And after the war, she went back to Lotz and not Lotz, Telts, and she was looking for survivors, and there were no survivors. But while she was there, she got a postcard from one of her father's students from the yeshiva who had heard that one of his daughters survived. The head yeshiva's daughter survived, so he sent her a postcard and asked her to come to Vilna where he was. And his name was Rav Isaac Ausband, and he had escaped to Russia along with 15 other of the students from the yeshiva, and were in Vilna, and they were helping people get papers to escape. And so she did go, she went there, and they ended up falling in love, and they got engaged, and he was discovered as supplying papers, falsifying papers, and so they escaped to Paris in 1946, and they got married in Paris, and they stayed there until they could get their papers to go to the US, and their destination was Cleveland, Ohio, because two of her uncles had escaped before the war or left before when they had gone to Cleveland, and they had set up, kind of reestablished the yeshiva in Cleveland, and it was called the Telts Yeshiva. And so her and her new husband, they went there, and her husband joined the staff, and she also worked in the staff, worked there at the yeshiva, and she eventually established the school, the Yavne Teachers College for Women. She was the founder and the dean of the school, and she taught women how to be educators and Jewish educators. It was a 2-year program. And really what we know about her is more from her students, because she never published anything of her own. And she was described as being very dignified woman who lived Torah. There was really no separation of her life from Torah and everyday life. They were just one. And she lived what they said about her was that she always had control of her actions and her reactions. She was very refined and dignified, and she taught the girls there all of Torah. There was no restrictions on what they could learn. Like a lot of there's more like some women aren't allowed to learn certain texts because for whatever reasons, but everything was accessible to them through her. She was very knowledgeable, and some of the things that her students said about her was that you couldn't learn Torah with your legs crossed. You had to keep your feet firmly on the ground, because you're having a dialogue with Hashem and His Word, and you need to be dignified while you're learning that. And also, you had to sit with good posture. The other thing is that she was very accepting of all kinds of backgrounds. There was just, as long as you wanted to be there in her school, she was willing to help you grow. And that's really her focus, was to educate and grow and empower women through Torah. So she ended up she had 9 children. The yeshiva is very successful. I'm sorry, I forgot to look at how many students they have, but hundreds of students, and she taught there for decades. What else? The one student said how they quoted a psalm about having delight in Torah, and that's how she viewed Torah, as a delight, and just really inspired a lot of women and to become educators. And so that was her. She's very modest, but she was very confident and solid in her Torah, and wanted to pass that on to her students. So that's all. Oh, I have a picture. I don't know if I can share, but which was interesting is that the building in Telz of the original yeshiva still exists. And there's a plaque on the outside that says it's been relocated to Cleveland, which I thought was very interesting. But I have a picture, but I don't know how to show it. But that's okay, you can look it up on Google. Yeah. So that's the Rebbetzin.
Thank you very much.
Nice. Thanks, Lauren.
That's great.
Yeah.
It's a great she's a great link between the world before the war and the generations of girls that she taught, that are still being taught by her teachings and by her school. That's an amazing accomplishment, especially after everything she'd been through. So thank you very much. That's great. Our next speaker is Shaindle. Where's Shaindle? There she is. And
can I share screen?
I hope so. Yes, I think you can. You should be able to.
It's a green button, Shane, on the bottom.
Oh.
And you're speaking about Pesha, Feinstein, Soloveitchik, right?
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Wait. I don't know how to do the file. Wait. Open or
I believe you go to slide and play, something like that. Yeah, in the middle up there.
Just put slideshow right
Oh, slideshow. Sorry, slideshow in the top right corner. There you go.
So old. Okay, wait, I'm just gonna make you guys a little. Okay, so mine is Pesha Feinstein Soloveitchik, and I was actually interested. I felt so bad there. I found a book on her whole life, but they only gave out like a couple chapters of her life, and then the rest you had to pay for, but you had to pay for like the actual book, and it wouldn't come on time, and it was like $300. So I didn't buy it, but I learned a little bit about her. We tried finding it there. It's hard to find because um yeah, it's either like they talk about her kid or her son or her husband. The only thing I really found from her was really the that book. So we'll try our best. But yeah, I wasn't sure if she was related to Moshe Feinstein or Soloveitchik, but so I'll be answering those questions in this talk. That's her. Basically, okay, so she was born April 13th, 1880 in Belarus. And then she traveled, I'll explain, they traveled for the learning to work at the YU yeshiva REITs in New York, but then they were in Boston. So she passed away January 3rd, 1967 in Boston, Massachusetts. And she's buried in Queens. So it basically it is a very interesting life. The book that I was reading started off talking about her wedding and her marriage. She was married to Rabbi Moshe Soloveitchik, who came from a long, long line of a dynasty of rabbis. And she, like her in-laws were Reb Chaim Soloveitchik, who is the son of the Beis Halevi. Like literally, I should have run down like her whole family tree. It's just mind blowing, the dynasty and the rabbis who like wrote every single commentary we have. It's pretty impressive, and she also came from a very good line of rabbis as well. She came from Rabbi Eliyahu Feinstein and Guta were her parents. And she's actually related to Reb Moshe Feinstein. So there's a lot of like cool holy blood in there. But it first started off with her being engaged. Her brother-in-law suggested that she should be engaged to Reb Moshe Soloveitchik, so Reb Chaim Soloveitchik's son. And everybody in the town was thinking about this type of marriage proposal, and they thought this would never work. This was a terrible idea because Reb Chaim Soloveitchik's whole line of dynasty was a very strict Torah learning scholars. They didn't interact with the outside world. They were very direct. They didn't like stray away from the law, which you're not supposed to, but there wasn't really any like that much leeway. And Pesha's family was more like willing to learn out from outside influences. Her father, Eliyahu Feinstein, gave her kind of like a secular education as well as a Torah education. And the Soloveitchik family was not into the secular education at all. So people thought like this was a little bit strange to be putting them together, but Rabbi Eliyahu and Rabbi Chaim at the time thought it would be a good idea because Rabbi Moshe, their son, was becoming a very great Torah scholar. And he learned all of this intellectual, he was very intellectual with Torah learning, but they said that what he needed would be somebody to kind of like question him. Reb Moshe didn't want to have somebody who would just listen to everything he said and just be okay with it. He wanted somebody to kind of like, oh, that's an interesting concept. What about this idea and that idea? Challenge him on it. So they went through with it. And again, most at the time when they found out a little bit more about her, that she was she was intellectual. She learned a lot about. She was very smart in regards to Torah learning, but she also was smart in regards to secular education. So the more they found out about her and learned more, they were like, oh, that's a little interesting. We're not really sure. Like, usually it's not so good to be secularly educated. But later on, they found the wisdom that she had, and Reb Chaim, her father-in-law, who originally was a little bit hesitant, looked up to his daughter-in-law and asked for her opinions on different matters. So, so what we'll learn more is she had, her children are very big giants in the Torah community. Her children are Rabbi Yosef Dov Soloveitchik, the Rav, Rabbi Shmuel Soloveitchik, Rabbi Aaron Soloveitchik, Shulamit Soloveitchik Meiselman, and Dr. Ann Soloveitchik Gerber. Rabbi Yosef Dov Soloveitchik, which we'll talk a little bit more about, he was like one of the main heads of the White Yeshiva University, especially the rabbinical side of the Torah learning at Yeshiva University. And his big thing was actually also to put to put secular kind of studies with Torah studies. So it came from her. Yeah, so as I said before, Pesha was an intellectual and would learn much Torah and secular studies from her father. I felt like very connected to her also in a way. Again, I learned a lot about her marriage proposal, because those were the only 2 chapters I really got. But when they were figuring out who she should be engaged to, or like the potential marriage proposal, she was cooking for her family, and she wanted to take a break, and she went outside, and she would climb the pear tree when she was like overwhelmed or needed a breather. So she'd climb this pear tree in her backyard and just sit there, and she overheard her, like it was like over her parents' room. So she kind of, she heard her father talking about Torah learning, and she wouldn't really listen as much, but then she heard her name over and over again. So she's like, oh, why is my name being talked about? And they were talking about her in this marriage proposal. And she's like, how could they, if they're talking about me, but I didn't even approve of anything. I don't even know who this man is. But she was intrigued. So she spoke to her parents about it. And yeah, they said that she's a very lively personality. Like back then, girls or women, she was 20 years old at the time, like it wasn't very ladylike to be climbing up a tree. And like just, chilling on a tree at 20 years old. Women were more like sitting down, not on trees. And she spoke to her parents, and she was kind of the first one at the time to say like, oh, there's this man who my parents are suggesting. Back then, you suggested a match. It was kind of your parents said who you're going to marry, and kind of that was it. But they had researched the person beforehand. This time she said, I want to approve of it. I want to meet the person. I want to meet my future potential husband in person, and then I'll say yes if I want to be with him. And then she said, I want to meet with him. And at the time, her future father-in-law was really like it was crazy for him to have this idea. Like, and her father also, like, oh, what do you mean you want to meet him? So they had to figure out they had a weird way of having her meet her husband. It was like, oh, we're gonna just have my parents visit, but then she came along in the end, and they met, and she was very intrigued and very impressed by her husband, Ramosha. And because he would give so much Torah learning, and she was impressed by his intellectual Torah abilities. So she said yes to the suggestion. They also were very interested in suggesting her because her parents had been in charge of the yeast sales in Belarus. Apparently you couldn't get yeast without their say so, or without them. So they were very well off. So her future father-in-law was thinking about the suggestions a lot more, because he said, oh, my son, he's a great Torah scholar. He'll be able to sit and learn, and they'll pay for him to live comfortably and provide parnasa to learn Torah. Pesha also, her great granddaughter said that Pesha loved Israel and helping people out. I just put some random things out there like that. That was a big thing about her. So again, yeah, her, I'm just trying to find, wait, there was a very big, there was an interesting thing when the wedding happened, when she finally was getting married. It was a very big thing. It was because, again, her parents were pretty well off. They were able to have a very nice wedding. And she had overheard from one of her family members that had overheard from one of her future family members that they kept saying to her future husband, oh, we're gonna, you got to remember who you were from, your great line of Torah dynasty, like a great line of rabbis. Just keep remembering that. And she thought to herself, like, okay, maybe I'm not as great of a Torah line of rabbis as he is, but I'm just as, like, I can become just as great. Like, I can become just as knowledgeable. So she really had that kind of that gall and that spirit to her, which I was very interested by. And there was one of the people that were her father-in-law didn't want to invite this rabbi who wrote a newspaper at the time. He was one of the first people in the newspaper. He wrote Torah ideas in a secular, but he would also write about like what's going on secularly that was happening, like worldly matters that were happening, but he would give it with a Torah opinion and perspective. And her father-in-law, Pesha's father-in-law, was not really at the time approving of this rabbi who did the newspaper, because he said, why should we have these Torah scholars and Torah learners learn about what's going on in the outside world? Like they need to focus on Torah learning. But the rabbi at the time said, well, they're gonna find out anyway. Like it's not possible to kind of bubble yourself in to a world, because they're going to figure out what's going on in the outside world. What you need to do is you have to teach them about the secular world, but give them Torah insight so that they can build on it. So her father was pro this guy with the newspaper. Like she grew up learning that it's good to have a secular education and it's also good to have a Torah education, and they kind of mix together. So that again was very different divide between the Feinstein family and the Soloveitchik family. And she actually gave that to her children. She insisted on her children having a worldly education in addition to a Torah education. So they went to like university. So yeah, big idea and exposure. And I mean, even I think those magazines now, like Mishpacha magazine and Ami magazine, are kind of in that same idea where you have secular education, but you put it like your secular news, but you put a Torah spin on it. She was an expert on Tanakh, Mishnah, and Midrashim, like in Yaakov. And one of the big things about her son, who was leading the YU, or the Yeshiva University, was he specifically put into practice that women, like in his college at Stern University, he wanted to make sure that the women had a secular education as well as a Torah education, that they were going to be the heads of both of those departments. And that's where Stern College and Yeshiva University are kind of up to right now. Apparently she had a stroke, and it was when she was older, and it was hard for her to move. And she saw everybody, she had her family over, and they weren't going to start the meal without her. And she knew that in order for them to eat, she'd have to eat also. But it was hard for her to move. So, and they were having bread. So she said, I have to wash for bread in order to eat. And I have to eat because everybody else won't eat. So she, even when it was hard for her to move, again, she had that, like that gall, that I don't know, that oomph to push herself to wash her hands so that other people would be able to eat. She fundraised for the base medrash, for like her husband, for his his learning at the base medrash, and she would fundraise for it, and she made cake for the learners as, again, like I think like a reward for them learning Torah and getting them excited. You know, nothing better than a good cake. Okay, so I really like this comment, like this paragraph from her daughter. They said, Pesha, although she lived long before the modern feminist movement appeared on the world scene, she always demonstrated her independence. And an unusual woman, she made her mark on modern orthodoxy. Imbued with the messages of her prophets of old, she dedicated her life to bringing up a family, striving to uphold the banner of Talmudic Judaism. At the same time, she insisted that Orthodox Jews must not limit themselves to a ghetto existence. That's like living in a bubble, but be part of the world in which they live. At first, her philosophical ideas encountered the resistance from the Soloveitchik family, but her perseverance broke through all kinds of obstacles. She and my father, like the Rebbe Moshe, the scion of the Volozhin Brisker tradition, achieved their dreams. Their descendants became the leaders of centrist orthodoxy in the United States and throughout the Jewish world. And I see that. I mean, like, there's so many people nowadays that are that go to Yeshiva University, that go to Stern, that are doing all these different things, that are working in the world and being role models, and that came all from her. I mean, even her husband taught Rabbi Bernard Lander, who then he went to Yeshiva University and then created Lander College for Women / Turtle University is where I went to school for college. So I really am kind of the benefactor of this woman, of integrating the Judaism, like being the head of Jewish thought and head of secular education as well.
Very nice.
That was beautiful. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's easy to forget that we're beneficiaries of these great people who came before us and gave us so much. Start universities and Lauren just spoke about one bridge that connects us to the past, and then we have who you spoke about, Pesha Soloveitchik, who's another bridge, but a different sort of. We have Tells, and now we have the Brisker line, and these are all great important people in our history that we do not want to forget about. Thank you very much. Our next presenter is Sarah Piha. Last year and the year before, she spoke about converts, and we didn't want to pigeonhole her to only speak about converts. Nothing wrong with converts, don't get me wrong, by all means. But if you want to watch those videos, I recommend you see them on our YouTube page. Like this one's going to be pretty soon. But this year, she's going to speak about somebody completely different. And let me replace the pin here. All right, Sarah, it's all you.
All right, we love us a convert, but we're mixing it up.
Yeah.
So before we can even start this presentation, I know you all know what Musar is, but let's just do a little break. Musar, a traditional Jewish spiritual discipline that offers sound guidance to help you cultivate the qualities of your soul. This person that we will be talking about, this woman, her father was the author of Kelm, and he was known for saying Kinderlach, keep it simple. So that was one of the biggest things in his schoolings and his teachings. So I thought it was only appropriate to have a very simple meaning of Musar, because that's going to be really important throughout this presentation. So we have Liebe, and she was the daughter of the author of Kelm. And author means elder. All right, so he was the teacher, he was the head of the Kelm Talmud Torah. His school was different, or his yeshiva was different than most of the other ones in Lithuania, because instead of just focusing on Talmud, he was focusing a lot on Musar. And according to Menahem Glenn, there was actually very little study of Talmud at the Talmud Torah, which still means they taught a lot, but at the same time, they really focused on the Musar. So the students were also learning on general subjects, things like that. But three of the things that he So I have 2 kids and no husband right now, so this might get a little crazy. So he had 3 kind of principles that he would focus on. The first one was one should become emotionally involved in learning. The other one was one should always ask themselves after learning, what did I know beforehand and what do I do now? So there's such a principle, you know, sometimes you go into learning something and you just think, okay, you know, now I know all this new stuff, but it's important to always relate it to where you've been as well as where you're going. And then the third one is one should always delve beyond the superficial and arrive at the care of the matter, which it kind of conflicts with what he says of Kinderlach, keeping it simple and keeping the basics. But it shows that he really focuses on the beginning and then growing up on that. So that's about him. So let's learn about his daughter. So his daughter was Nechomoh Liebe. And what did she do? So she was really a faithful reflection of her father. And they say behind every man is a good woman, or beside every man is a good woman, depending on when you see the quote. But she was really that. She was such a good supporter of her father, even after his passing, such a good supporter of her husband, and not in a way where she just, you know, praised them and said they were great. She really lived in the Torah that they taught and was able to make it her own and continue to grow and serve Hashem more and more and more. She would give shirim at the Kelm on Musar, and she had a reputation of being the greatest expositor of the Kelm approach, which is very focused on the Musar and a faithful reflection of her great father. And this quote, it's a long one, so we don't need to read the whole thing, but there was a man, Rabbi Simcha Zissel. Rabbi Simcha Zissel was the altar of Kelm. But there was a mashkia who spent years living at their house, Rav Moshe Rosenstein. And he was a mashkia, and he spent so much time at their house, and he said everything she did, whether it was you know, setting the Shabbat table or planning an event for the community or planning an event in her home, or everything she did, she had good and upright conduct, and she showed the wisdom and the master of her father. So she was always looking for opportunities to teach her father's teachings on Musar and just continue his legacy, but do it in everyday life. So not just saying, okay, today I'm going to do a class about this and then doing whatever she wants after. She was through and through. Everything she did was on Musar, it was on helping her father, it was helping her father's legacy, and from there. So everything she did was hand in hand with who she was hand in hand with her everyday doings. And it was all serving Hashem and really focused on principle and character and being a good person, serving Hashem, being righteous, and going above and beyond what you could. She was consistently valiant. So during the final days of her husband was Zadik Zavie Hirsch-Broide, and he was another follower of the Rabbi of Kelm. His schedule was so consistent that people would set their watch according to his because they wanted to have the most accurate watch possible. You could literally, he was the same place every day, same time. He had a really strong system. He also had a sick son. Nothing said that Nechomoh had any children. So I don't know if it was from the same marriage with her or a different marriage, but he had a sick son, and he would follow. He would still take care of him and then move on and do the rest of his days as well. So basically everyone, they say you're the sum of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And Nechomoh Liebe truly surrounded herself with amazing people. So it's just a reminder that if you surround yourself with other people who are following the path of the Torah and doing good and having strong schedules and not straying away from the way, then you're gonna just continue to be better and better and better. And when her husband got sick, and then eventually passed, she was to fix a leaf blower right now. She was constantly reminding the students of him, saying, hey, we need to continue forward. So first it was her father who passed, and she kind of had to keep the rocks of all the students and keep everything solid while everyone else took over. And then it was her husband. And she would remind the students that the point of everything was not to mourn her husband's death. It was to keep the Talmud Torah living and to keep it continuously going on and on and on. And what can they do to do better? What can they do to do mitzvahs? What can they do to continue the legacy of both her husband and father. So she really made sure that nobody lost their focus. And unfortunately, she lived till a very old age, but sadly, she was murdered by the Nazis in the Kelm massacre of 1941. There wasn't as much information as I expected to on her being there and her passing. That's what we got, unfortunately, but it was horrible because it was pretty much the whole legacy that she and her father and everyone built was destroyed. However, we can still continue to live in her honor by following Musar. And I was thinking, because her father and her husband really focused on starting simple and then continuing to grow and grow and grow and build upon the basics. We had our very simple quote about Musar at the beginning. And at the end, let's get a little beefier. Let's learn some more. Works of Musar frequently address core Torah commandments, such as loving God and repentance, continuing them as practical commandments in all senses, and discussing all their particulars. Such works address the importance of having correct mindset and the spiritual significance of every person's action. And I think this is so important because, especially as a convert during conversion, you read a lot on how to do stuff, you know, how to go to the synagogue and pray, how to eat kosher, how to do this. And sometimes that Musar component can be missing a little bit because you're learning so much of the details on how to do things and, you know, checking the boxes in the test, and you don't necessarily always get that Musar. So one of the rabbis that I was talking to was said that after you convert, Musar is a really great thing to focus on because it's kind of taking everything you've learned to that next level, and you don't have to be worrying about a test or anything like that. You can just focus on, okay, I've learned these amazing things. I am practicing these things. I've accepted and I'm part of it. And now, you know, let's build to the next level. So you have to start at the basics, start at your kindergarten level, Kinderlach, and then just build and build and build. Thank you.
Beautiful.
Thank you so much. Yeah, again, this is another person that we don't know very much about, unfortunately, and it's a shame. You know, we've got the yeshiva of Kelm, the Saba of Kelm, the altar of Kelm is famous and is quoted in books and books, and in every yeshiva almost in the world talks about the yeshiva of Kelm as like one of the foundational yeshivas that all the yeshivas today are all based on. And yet many people don't know that there was a teacher there who was a woman. You know, it's kind of significant. And the more we know these kinds of things, the more hopefully we'll be able to have the right kind of society that these people were trying to build. So yeah, absolutely. I don't think I don't think that their message or legacy is dead. It continues in their teachings, and especially if we live to follow in their ways. So thank you very much. I really appreciate that. And our last presenter of the evening, unless anybody else volunteers afterwards, is Rebecca Press, and she's going to speak about, and I'm going to for sure mispronounce it, Doña Gracia's Abasi.
Rabbi. Hi, everyone. I just want to thank everyone who has presented so far. This is always a highlight of the year, coming together and learning about the wonderful women in the Torah world. May we all strive to be as meritorious as them, and may our lives also be filled with mitzvahs like them. So today, yeah, we'll be learning about the life of Doña Gracia Nasi, lovingly called as La Señora in Spanish and Hagiveret in Hebrew. She's a Jewish heroine of unparalleled strength and influence, navigating through adversity to champion her people in quite a difficult time. And so let's get through it. So Gracia Nasi was born in 1510. That is some 15 years after the expulsion from Spain was decreed. Although she was born in Lisbon, and you know, as you can see on the map, they're quite close to each other. So there was definitely some aftershocks in the community that could be felt. She was born into a family of conversos, Jews that were forced to convert to Christianity, but still maintained their Jewish practices, albeit in secret. And like many converso families, she married within, and she married a prominent merchant named Francisco Mendez. And just for some historical context, at this point in time, Vasco da Gama had already went around Portugal to India. And so this is like the early globalization of trade. And this is where the Mendez family were able to make their fortune. The family was able to extend loans to the Portuguese kings. They participated in banking, in jewels, and they really capitalized off of the huge maritime trade that was taking off in Portugal in the late 1400s. Gracia and her husband, Francisco, had one daughter, and her husband was older than her by quite a bit. And soon he had passed away, leaving Gracia and their family fortune susceptible to the court's coffers. And soon after he'd passed away, the royal courts came after her, wanting the funds and wanting to absolve the loans that he had given. But in good conscience, he had left the family business to her. Now, again, this was happening in the 1500s. So we can learn from this the high esteem that he must have held his wife in, and the important role that Jewish women have had for centuries when it comes to the Jewish family and making parnasa. And so after her husband's death, she fled the Inquisition's reach, first to Antwerp, as we see in this map, and then to Venice, and using her family's wealth and connections to ensure her and her family's safety, eventually ending up in the Ottoman Empire. But let's learn a little bit more about her and her husband. So this is a portrait that was made of the two of them, very regal. And so after his death, Gracia took over the business, becoming one of the most powerful women in Europe, really. And they traded extensively at her direction in spices, textiles, precious metals, and utilizing their banking expertise to facilitate international trade, expanding what the family had already started. And she partnered with her nephew, Joseph Nasi, and through expanding their operations and their influence, they were able to provide critical aid to Jews fleeing persecution from the Inquisition. These causes, she was instrumental in helping Jewish refugees escape the Inquisition by establishing a secret network, sometimes referred to as the Nasi line, to smuggle Jews out of Spain and Portugal. She actually negotiated with the Ottoman Sultan Suleiman, some call him Magnificent, to secure safe havens, including attempting to resettle Jews in Tiberias with the vision of creating a self-sustaining Jewish community. Although some of her initiatives, like the Tiberias Project, were short-lived, her efforts laid the groundwork for future Jewish communities. And again, here we can see that the dream for a Jewish home in Eretz Israel has been in the works for hundreds and thousands of years. This is something very close to all of our hearts, and it's something that has withstood the test of time. But aside her influence in the Jewish world and helping Jews reach safety, she was also a patron of the Renaissance, and her influence transcended borders, blending commerce with culture. Her support helped foster intellectual and cultural exchanges during the Renaissance, even though she was a few hundred years before, but it was still like the early stages. She helped the era's rich tapestry of knowledge and discovery. Her financial and diplomatic support enabled significant cultural and scientific advancements. For example, she supported renowned figures such as the physician Amatus Lucianus, a Jewish Portuguese physician who discovered how the blood circulates in the human body. And she also helped fund João de Barros, a famous historian who wrote his account on how the Portuguese discoveries in Asia. And that provides even helpful context to this day of the insights into the period of exploration and the interactions between the European and the Asians. So besides championing for her people, she was all around. She was committed to Torah, and she was committed to helping the spread of knowledge everywhere. and knowledge for the good also. And it's a very interesting time in terms of globalization and the early days, but that's not to say that it was without adversity. Like we mentioned before, after her husband's passing, many people wanted to come after her, including, the Inquisition and European monarchies threatened by her influence and her wealth. The Portuguese crown sought to confiscate her assets, which was what led her to flee to Venice and later to the Ottoman Empire. Her adversaries included powerful figures like Charles V and Philip II of Spain. Through diplomatic channels, so we can see what kind of a woman she must have been to be able to hold herself in such difficult times when literal kings of countries are coming after you and everything you own, everything you've built. And not even to say the people that she's helped. So through these diplomatic channels, she cultivated strong relationships with Ottoman officials, including the Sultan Suleiman, ensuring her family's safety and the protection of many Jewish refugees. Her adept use of diplomacy and wealth enabled her to outmaneuver those who sought to strip her of her power and resources, making her a prominent figure in European politics and Jewish history. And I think it's important to add that she never compromised her Torah values either. And here we can see how her story and her life exemplify the power of one individual and agency in shaping history. So she not only safeguarded countless Jews and Jewish communities during one of the darkest periods of European history, and also fostered a spiritual and cultural intellectual advancement, but she established trade networks, she supported the arts, sciences, and diplomatic acumen are testament to her multifaceted contribution. And today, her story inspires advocates for religious freedom, women's leadership, and Torah values. And the photos on this slide are of children's graphic novels that are based on her life and of her story. So her vision of a Jewish homeland in the land that the Jewish people are indigenous to, her business acumen, her philanthropic legacy continue to resonate and highlight the enduring impact one Eshet Hayil can have on the world. Thank you.
So nice.
Yeah.
Thank you all so very much. That was beautiful. That was really amazing. I learned quite a bit from all of you, and I can't wait to hear what we'll learn about next year. If God willing, we'll get a chance to do this again. Obviously, we're still looking for volunteers for next time, and but this was great. You see, it's just I didn't really prepare these thoughts, but I'm just overwhelmed by how much sacrifice women went throughout the ages. We had people from the from the expulsion in Spain all the way through the Holocaust, and especially being this time of the year with now the 9 days upon us. It's a good time to reflect about not just these great women, but Jews of the past who sacrificed everything for us to be here today and to have Torah, and to continue to let Torah spread and the truth of the Torah, and to really assist each other in living the best possible lives that we can have. So again, I wanted to thank everybody for doing this. I learned a lot, and I hope you all did as well. And wish you now I can wish you successfully a Chodesh Tov and a brand new month. And this month we should only hear Besorot Tovot, good news for all of us, and we should only see this terrible time turn into a time of simcha. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.